All right. So there's a concept that I recently learned about. And I'm sorry to begin this in academic world, but it'll hit sports very, very soon. There's a concept in sociology I recently learned about called sport space. I think you might like this. It's the idea that culture only has room for 3 to 4 sports at scale at any one time. And this term comes from a book called Offsides, which is an effort to explain why soccer is the world's favorite pastime, but a distant also ran in the US behind, football, baseball, basketball, maybe hockey. And the thesis from this book, Offside, was in the space between 1870 and 1920, America's sport space was filled. Baseball, football, basketball is invented, takes over. And America at the time was very interested in honing an identity that was distinct from Europe and certainly distinct from England. And so we resisted soccer. And for the first 100 years, football and basketball and baseball crowded out the game of soccer, essentially.
And
so
boxing.
This idea, and boxing. Yeah, absolutely right, especially in the early 1900s, mid 1900s too. But so this idea of a fixed sports space would explain why it's really hard for sports to break into mass culture, right? We don't really have a lot of earthquakes. We have some like long tectonic shifts, but not a lot of earthquakes. And this is my long wind up to say that as big a deal as the Caitlin Clark phenomenon is, I wonder if 15 years from now, it'll be clear that we're actually systematically underrating what a big deal Caitlin Clark's entry in the WNBA is. Like, we're treating the story as if the WNBA is having a boomlet, as if this is the top. But what if it's the beginning? So I was doing some research on the differences between the WNBA and NBA rights deal that was just signed. In the new WNBA deal, the Women's League gets about $20 million a year. And tell me if you think, if any of this is wrong. I'm not an expert on this. I just did the research. WNBA gets about $20 million a year. NBA deal is worth closer to $7 billion a year. That means the NBA is getting 35 times more money per year from the television networks than the WNBA. 35 times more. Is the NBA really, statistically, mathematically, 35 times more popular than the WNBA is right now? The NCAA women's tournament beat the NCAA men's tournament, although it got 99% less money. The typical NBA game on ESPN, ABC gets 1.6 million viewers. In June, ESPN reported that WNBA games are averaging 1.3 million viewers. Not 35 times less, like 25% less. Caitlin Clark Angel Reese games are averaging 2.3 million viewers, more than the typical NBA game. What if this is one of those once-in-a-century earthquake moments in the sports space? What if the WNBA has crashed the gates, and rather than thinking, oh, this is a nice story, this is a neat story, no, actually maybe this is such a big story that the current deals just signed will be seen as laughably incoherent in 5 years? What if in a few years the WNBA is right at par, if not getting more viewers per game than the NBA? That's not so crazy considering it's only 25% less now. And again, the gap is a factor of 35. So in terms of what they're making. So I am really interested in the possibility that as much attention as obviously is being brought to the WNBA, it's actually not nearly enough. We're in a once-in-a-century moment in American sports.
Yeah, you could feel it with Caitlin because there were similarities to Tiger Woods and some other phenomenons that just felt like this is something that this isn't a fad. This isn't like a short-term thing. This is something that feels different. It's tilted, whatever the landscape was. So I asked people, I didn't understand why they didn't split the WNBA out of their deal.
Right.
And I think the reason, and I'm not reporting this and I'm not positive, but I think the reason is because the NBA basically funded the WNBA forever, right? They always shoehorned it into their deals. The league was not popular. The league was not doing well. And they were basically force feeding the networks to carry it at it like it was worth more than it probably was, right? Until you get through the mid 2010s. The league hit this point where Taurasi was the best player in the league and didn't even play one season because she could make more money elsewhere. So the first 20 years, they really put the time in and kept it alive and funded it and spent money on it. And to me, the move should have been, because they could see what was happening, to pull the WNBA rights out and try to sell it for as much as they could. But I feel like they were like, you know what? We spent all this money keeping this league alive and funding it since 1996, whenever it was, that we're going to shoehorn it into this deal because we want the benefits of it. And then 10, 11 years from now, if the WNBA keeps going the way we're going, then we'll shoehorn it out. So it's almost like this was kind of their tip on the restaurant bill for everything they did. And I don't think they should have done it that way. I think they should have spun it out and everybody wants rights. I think they could have gotten way more than whatever the number was assigned for. And it just felt greedy to me. I didn't get it.
When the question is greedy on behalf of whom? It's greedy on behalf of the NBA, whose proceeds are going to the owners and the players. But it's not going to make any sense if 5 to 10 years from now, the WNBA has essentially the same ratings as the NBA.
It's going to lead to a labor strike is what's going to happen.
That's exactly where I was going.
That's where we're heading in the next 2 years.
If there's a world where Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and Jay Wilson are all making 35 times less, right now they're making 600 times less than NBA players. If they're making still making 30 times less than NBA players, and they're getting the same TV ratings.
Well, how about this?
Of course they're going to strike.
What if there's an alternate league? I mean, this is how the ABA started, right? The NBA players underpaid, didn't make enough money, didn't really have some basic labor stuff in their favor until they unionized in 1964. But then the ABA came in 1967. And guess what? All of a sudden, all this shit changed and salaries went up by 4 times. And then in the 1970s, all of a sudden, NBA players were worth 3 times what they used to be worth.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that I think is going to happen is I think somebody's going to try to form an alternate league, because it's not like all of these WNBA players are tied to their teams forever, right? So you could start a league and be like, you know what? We have more money over here. Like that would seem to be the move. And I personally don't understand why the women's soccer franchises are worth, like they just paid $250 million for the LA one, and the expansion ones for the WNBA were like at $110 million. I don't understand why soccer is worth more than WNBA, because the TV ratings say the opposite. The interest on social media and the interest even in the sports world just says the opposite. So yeah, I'm with you. So we both feel like something funky is going to happen over the next couple of years because of this deal.
It doesn't make any sense. If I'm part of a company, and I know that I am just as successful and just as lucrative as an employee at some other company who's making 35 times more than me, why in the world would I stick with that company? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, something is going to happen that has the potential to blow up the WNBA as the rights deal exists. And in that respect, I think, to take your tip analogy, this is just incredibly short-sighted. If you think you're essentially just saying, I'm taking the tip on all the benefits that I gave you for the last 20 years, this is your way of saying thank you. Okay, well, Caitlin Clark, was she alive when the WNBA started?
Well, they could have put it in where it's like, it's a 4-year, 4 of the 11 years, and then we'll revisit the WNBA side as an out clause. Should have done something like that. All right, we're aligned. I have, I'll make this quick because we got to go. My future of everything. I think we're in peak athlete hagiography era. This is it. We have player pods where people just get to say whatever they want. Nobody challenges them. Nobody asks questions. They just get to be like, yeah, we would have won the title that year. There's no facts brought in. We have these infomercial documentaries and the all access shows that usually somebody involved is an executive producer or their production company is. We have these biopics about celebrities that I'm sure are coming for athletes too. And then we have these social media clips from the pods where these things are spat out in 90-second clips where it's like, Joel Embiid saying stuff like, yeah, if Jason Tatum has a super team, if I went 5 for 20, we'd lose every game, and nobody sitting with him could be like, but Joel, you've only played 433 games in 10 years. And Jason Tatum's beaten you 3 times in the playoffs. How can you say that? Nobody challenges everything, and we're just in hagiography mode now. And it's all everybody's going to have their own long documentary series that spins whatever their career is. Even the people that weren't that successful now have these pods where they talk about themselves like they were like these major amazing things. The inability for anyone to challenge some of this stuff feels like we're just creating this alternate version of sports history that's just kind of happening over here. And I hope people see it.
Why do you think this trend is going to end?
It's not. It's going to get worse.
I thought you said it was PK geography. Yeah, I think we are. It's
this is it. We've
the way I feel about hate geography
another...
is how I feel about conspiracy theories. It's just going to keep happening because all of the incentives push for it. I was watching Love Island USA with my wife, and there were some accusations that flew around on this show, like on every reality show, dating show, that some people are just in it to become influencers. But if you think about it, athletes are in a perfect situation to become influencers. They've already won the lottery of fame. People talk about them on ESPN. People talk about them on podcasts. They're already famous. And so if everyone sees fame as a road to becoming an influencer, then every NBA star in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, whatever's coming next, are also going to see that their NBA fame buys them a ticket that they can enter into the lottery of potentially becoming a cultural influencer that you can get a bunch of extra money from. So as I see it, there's a way in which if you were a manager or an agent for some young, smart, funny, articulate athlete, 22, 23, who cares if they're famous? Tell them to start a podcast. The worst that happens is that you stop recording. The best that happens is that you become famous. So I think everything is pushing towards this. I think that you're going to see more. And it's funny to think that in the 1980s, I think Klosterman and you have probably had this conversation many times, but in the 1970s, 1980s, selling out was considered a bad thing. Today, it's entirely flipped. Selling out is a good thing. Merchandising yourself, making a brand of yourself is just what everybody does. So this world of if you're a sports star, you can also be an influencer. This is just the start.
Well, we had in the 40s and 50s, they would have autobiographies. And then in the 50s and 60s and 70s, like Sports Illustrated, Sport Magazine, some of these places, they would write these first-person essays, right? And they were always, Will Chamberlain had some great ones. I remember when I was researching my book, Will Chamberlain, he basically created what the player podcasts are now, where he's like, I should have 8 titles, and my teammates let me down. He would just say crazy shit, and it was like nobody checking him because it was his first-person essay. But in probably mid 70s on through the 90s, there was a balance to all this stuff, and that balance is now gone. And the reason I mention this is like, think about how crazy it is to produce documentaries about yourself, right? Like we wouldn't blink if it's an autobiography. It's like, I wrote this autobiography. You're reading it and you're like, all right, I'm going to take this with a grain of salt. It's an autobiography. But now people are producing documentaries about themselves and there's no grain of salt. And you really saw this with the Patriots one. Where it's like, here's the history of the Patriots. It's our story. And it's like, no, this is Bob Kraft's version of the story. This isn't a documentary that's balanced and does all these different things. Like, can you imagine, like, if you're like, hey, I have an announcement to make. I'm doing a 4-part documentary about myself. It's produced by my new company, Derek Thompson Productions. And it's a 4-part documentary about the impact that I've had on journalism. People would be like, what the fuck is going on? You're producing it yourself? That's insane. But that's where we've landed with sports and culture. That's where we've landed with these biopics about Bob Marley, Elton John. It's like, what are we doing? None of this stuff has any sort of real merit. I don't know. I hate all of it.
I'm not sure I like it either. I do think it's interesting to think about self-produced documentaries as really just being the 21st century version of autobiographies. I'd never quite thought about that. But we don't really have a moral issue with people writing autobiographies. And yet we do. I think you're right. There does feel something icky about a self-produced documentary about yourself. But maybe there isn't
you're
anything
seeing it with
icky.
all these all-access shows that are going to happen. Like there's 17 camera crews following all the Olympic teams. It's like, are we really going to get the authentic? Like what happens if Joel Embiid gets benched in the last 2 games of the Olympics? Are we going to be covering that in our all-access on the USA Olympic team? No.
Yeah.
So I just hope people understand the difference between content where somebody can at least, you know, there might be a tiny bit of journalism there, or stuff that's just all access infomercial stuff, which is where we're heading with basically everything.
Yeah, it's marketing, right?
Might be time for me to go. Like, just in general. This new era, I might be out.